Hello, everyone. My name is Joanne Lockwood, and I'm your host for the Inclusion Bites podcast. In this series, I've interviewed a number of amazing people and simply had a conversation around the subject of inclusion, belonging, and generally making the world a better place for everyone to thrive. If you'd like to join me in the future, then please do drop me a line to joe.lockwood@seechangehappen.co.uk. That's SEE changehappen.co.uk. You can catch up with all of the previous shows on iTunes, Spotify, and the usual places. So plug in your headphones, grab a decaf, and let's get going. Today is episode 43, with the title Freedom for Everybody. And I have the absolute honour and privilege to be joined by Lulu Minns. Lulu says she is a rebel radio podcaster, an award-winning coach, and a retreat specialist. And when I asked Lulu to describe her superpower, she said she is a challenger by nature. Hello, Lulu. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Joanne. It's really good to be with you. And it's always interesting for a challenger by nature to be interviewed rather than interviewing.
Yes, I suppose it is. Be on the other end of the mic, so to speak. And we've been talking about getting you on the show for a couple of months now, and finally pleased we've managed to achieve it on this beautiful sunny day in the middle of June. Fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's quite tempting to do it in the garden.
Yes, I know. It'd be lovely, wouldn't it? I think I must rig up my studio out there. Mm-hmm. So tell me, we called this episode Freedom for Everybody. What does that mean to you?
Oh, it's such a good question. It means so much to me, actually. And you probably know as well, when you kind of do work on yourself, when you run a business as a consultant, etc., looking at your values, freedom's always been a really core value of mine. So much so, I was a criminal defence lawyer before doing what I do now, and, literally fought for people's freedom from incarceration, if you like. So when I was really doing work on myself, quite a lot of emotion came up for me as to how important freedom is. And I've always used the word rebel in my branding, and, all rebels, want freedom. But I often say all she-rebels don't just want freedoms for themselves. They want freedom for everybody else. And I feel like, as a society and in humanity right now, we're really on a tipping point of exploring what that looks like and how we can move forward with that, and really looking at how much women have to contribute to the narrative of freedom for everyone. So it really is a core that runs through everything I do and everything I always have done. But I mentioned that kind of emotional piece. I've always felt as well a certain degree of rejection for being a rebel, for being a challenger by nature, and always, running forward with freedom above anything else, really, for myself and for other people.
It must have been, I suppose, as a rebel, must have been tricky being a defence lawyer at times, because you must have seen some injustice, and you must be fighting for people that maybe were in the marginalised section of society who didn't have, if you like, their human rights being protected. And that must have been quite frustrating for you at times.
Yeah, it was. Luckily, kind of when I started, I was a bit, green behind the ears or wet behind the ears or whatever they call it. So, I was kind of still learning the ropes. But certainly as I became more confident and self-assured in, being vocal in court and knowing that I was right about certain things, I did become increasingly frustrated with what I was seeing and more powerful in what I was saying and advocating for, but also really more frustrated in seeing the kind of system, as it were, for what it was, which was a big part of me leaving, actually, because I kind of felt like I have to become part of this system to really flourish more than I had done already, and I refused to do that. So it was tough to watch, and I learned a lot, but was glad that I left when I did.
I'm going to ask you a leading question now. Why was it frustrating for you? Is it that the process itself is steeped in privilege and bias, or is it just that traditional or old school nature, or maybe it's a man's world still in the legal system?
Yeah, it was kind of all of it really thrown in, and it took departing from it to really start to unpick that, I didn't even notice, and I was probably naive in some ways, growing up in Brighton, which there's a lot of diversity and inclusion, and, my parents are very unconventional, and I've always kind of gravitated to maybe groups that are marginalised for whatever reason. And I was probably naive being a woman in that field. I thought, growing up, the world's your oyster, you can do whatever you want. And it was only on leaving and reflection that I kind of recognized, actually, I was told to tone it down, not be aggressive, not to be too assertive because it wasn't taken very well. That was actually because I was a woman and I was female in that role. And that didn't really occur to me at the time. It massively frustrated me, but I didn't really almost put the two and two together that's why I was having that experience. And actually, the more confident I became, the more I was getting that feedback that actually wasn't acceptable in my role. And I was confused by that because I was a defense lawyer. I'm like, isn't that what I'm supposed to be doing? Being a challenger by nature?
Yeah. So is that the system, if you like, not valuing strong women? They want women to behave in a feminine way, not in a more masculine way. Was that the challenge?
Yeah, absolutely. And I would even have, men that didn't work for, in my firm, they were not my boss, etc., would intervene potentially or feel that they had something to say about, say, a conversation that me and a prosecutor were having in court. They would intervene or, treat me like their employee or, you shouldn't say that, you should back off a bit, etc. And, I would always, again, stand up for myself within that. But, again, it became really frustrating to do. And, having to bring a certain energy to deal with that on a daily basis was actually quite exhausting.
The classic mansplaining.
Absolutely. And as we know, women in those positions tend to leave before, those promotional, I was head of department, I left before partnership. And that is the classic moment of when women leave. I think often it's looked at of women having children and things like that. But it's so much deeper than that. I don't have children. That wasn't the reason. Yet, there's lots of women I know that leave for all sorts of reasons that they can't necessarily articulate at that time.
So you're a rebel at heart, and as you said, you came from a rebel family. Your parents are kind of non-conventional. You spent a lot of time growing up in Brighton, yes, which I think most people would describe as a fairly non-conventional place to live as well. So you found freedom by moving as well, didn't you? You relocated to the West Country.
Yeah. We've always actually, as a family, come on holiday down to the West Country, and St Ives in particular, for the artist scene. It's always quite a bohemian scene. The surrealist artists used to come to Cornwall as well. So again, I've always felt quite an affinity with the West Country, and we do as a family. So, but that's quite a recent location. But I've previously lived in Manchester, London, and things like that. But I grew up with a lot of artistic inspirations, Frida Kahlo, Lee Miller. I don't know if she's familiar to you as a surrealist photographer, and a lot of music as well. So I'm super grateful for that. I guess my rebelling against my parents was to get a conventional job, which was interesting.
So a double rebel. So you're rebelling against the rebellers.
Exactly, yeah. And rebelling with my father, because he's a musician, is to like rubbish music, and that would really upset him, like ordering the Backstreet Boys because they ran a music shop. So, ordering something terrible, again, conventional would be a form of rebelling. So, it was a kind of flip on its head for rebellion in that sense.
Excellent. So you say you run retreats. Tell me a bit more about those retreats and what goes on. What's the purpose?
Yeah, when I started coaching, again, it was a real heart-based decision. I wanted to run a retreat for the women that I coach in Morocco because, again, Morocco is quite unconventional. I love it. So I hosted my first retreat in Morocco in 2017. which was amazing. I didn't make it easy for myself, however, because just even, paying the Riyadh and, it's not on home turf. It's a very different place for those people that have been to Morocco, although a beautiful place. And I really wanted to create that space for women. Again, many women don't have the luxury of time. I was reading an article the other day and doing a lot of research about this, particularly with coronavirus and the pandemic. Again, a lot of childcare, housework, etc., has fallen on women within the home, having to drop their businesses. And an article saying, that women haven't previously had the luxury to develop their genius, as say, Carl Jung, Sigmund Freud, etc., really had this gift of a luxury of time. And I've noticed over the past 5-6 years working with women, they don't often feel that they deserve time either. And retreats really give women that space and time, over 72 hours, 3 days. And I've noticed over the last 5 years hosting retreats that the women I work with really come back to me and go, it was the retreat that changed absolutely everything for me. So this year, I may be crazy, but, being a rebel at heart, we're doing 3 retreats in post-pandemic. Fingers crossed we can do them. But we've had 2 that we've had to move previously. And, we work with such incredible women that are happy to do it whenever. We'll do it at a later date. And it hasn't been, there's been a lot of admin with it, but it's well worth creating that space for women to work on themselves and their businesses.
It's a really interesting thought where you say women often don't feel they have the time for themselves or they don't make time because there's always this kind of self-pressure to keep going, to find something else to do, and stopping. It almost feels like you're letting somebody else down, whatever that may be, your family, your work, or whatever that may be, your children, and stopping and taking time for yourself is a really hard thing to do. And certainly women who are maybe entrepreneurs or in very busy lives and careers, it's really hard to stop, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And I think, as women, we feel super connected, don't we? It's that connection to everything and everyone that to disconnect and focus, on ourselves or on that one thing, whether you've got children or not, can feel like a much, harder thing to do. And, as you say, it's giving yourself permission to actually do that, which is really important, and educating women to do that, because actually when women burn out, everyone else around them is affected because of that massive connection and, nurture that we have for others.
Because certainly, if you like, the home admin side of it is everlasting, isn't it? There's always something to do, and I think where we're not careful, we almost feel because we're the buck stop for a lot of activities, a lot of tasks. And if we don't do them, nobody's going to do them. And if we take a time out, they're still there when we get back as well. So we feel this kind of must do little and often, all the time. And even taking a break and having a half hour in front of the telly, just zoning out or reading a book, often you have to make that time because it doesn't come natural. I'm certainly experiencing that myself.
Yeah, definitely. And there's a lot of talk, now, isn't there? It's quite trendy to talk about self-care and things like that. And it really is a personal journey for everyone and every woman in particular, because there tends to be more of a battle with that. And, it really does self-care and takes some doing. We can really focus and think it's about the being, which it is, but it takes some doing. And I often say to clients, if it's not in your diary, it's not going to happen. So for me, no one messes with my yoga schedule, and that goes in my diary first before anything and anyone. That goes in my diary, because then I know I can serve everyone and with what they need at a much deeper level when I have filled myself first. And I learned that the hard way by being a defense lawyer for 11 years. And again, I wasn't just with my clients, I wasn't just their lawyer. I was lawyer, secretary, mother, social worker, PA, you name it, whatever they needed, which is why I was successful and a popular lawyer as choice for many of my clients who were in and out of the criminal justice system. But there was not a lot left for me by the end of that. And it took me some recovery time.
So when you're working with your female solopreneurs, leaders, what are the biggest challenges you find that they're trying to tackle in their life? Is it just imposter syndrome and limiting beliefs, or is there far more than that?
Oh, far more than that. But, in a good way, some of it is really positive as well. Lack of time is massive. I create really powerful self-study courses for women that are really short and, short and bite-sized deliberately, that you can take 5 minutes a day, 10 minutes a day, or just do it once a week and still make progress. But again, this lack of time thing is massive. Lack of confidence and lack of permission to themselves to really actually do things in the way that they may want to do them and to do things differently. Again, women can tend to be conditioned to not break the rules and to, follow things and do more of what they are supposed to, in inverted commas. And I can't remember, my background's in criminology as well. So I think it's called double deviance. So if a woman breaks the rules, it's not only the rule she's broken, it's the rule of being female and a woman that she's broken as well. So there's a double punishment, if you like, and that's evident in the criminal justice system, and it's also evident in corporate positions, etc. If a woman doesn't follow the protocol and the processes, so women can spend a lot of time double checking themselves to make sure they've got things right, which is exhausting ultimately. And, imagine all that time and energy that could be spent, on doing other things instead.
So do you believe that's nature or nurture? Is this how women are socialized from a young age to be compliant, to be rule protectors, rule setters?
Yeah, that age-old question. I've spent my lifetime studying that nature or nurture question, I think. And I really do think, I think it's a mixture of both. But I definitely think nurture is really, really strong. And, but also nature, it's being proven more and more that we carry ancestral trauma from our ancestors, from our ancestral line of previous experiences that family members and stuff have had. So I find that fascinating and really, really interesting. And then even when I look at my own upbringing, which I said is very unconventional, I've got two sisters, a very, very female dominated family, if you like. Me and my sister were talking about the other day, the films that we used to watch and some of the children's books. We used to read My Naughty Little Sister. And she's reading it to her daughter at the moment, who's only 5. And she said, I'm horrified that the boy Harry is just being a boy and the girl is being very rude and very naughty. So she's like, Isla's loving it, but I'm actually wanting to stop reading it to her. We used to love those books.
It's interesting how generations change, and we look back at some of the stuff that we're now feeding our children in horror around the stereotyping and how that yesteryear almost, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And I don't know, do you remember Baba the Elephant? Did you ever used to read those books?
Yes, I remember Barbara the Elephant, yeah.
Yeah.
Very macho.
I went to a talk, an International Women's Day a couple of years ago in Brighton, and there was a chef, and I can't remember her name, but she opened the Cannabis Kitchens in Brighton, and she'd come out of banking, and she was saying that, when she entered, the chef industry, that women were cooks and men were chefs. And I was like, oh my God, I was sitting there going, I never thought about that before. But yeah, maybe that's right. And then I went to my friend's house. We were trainee lawyers together. She's got 2 little boys. And I was reading her older little boy, who was 3 at the time, Baba the Elephant. He comes over to me with this book, and Baba the Elephant is doing like a cooking thing in this book. And at the end of the book, I get to the last page. I had a fit by it, but the boy elephant, Baba, got a chef's hat and all the girls got pink bows. And I said to her, I was like, Melanie, this book, what on earth? And what is this showing the boys? And she was like, oh God, I've never really thought about it. And, that was a book from our childhood. All the front cover was wrinkled, it was a really old book. So again, we had this kind of conversation of those subtle messages, which are everywhere, despite parenting that might be different.
I mean, even classics, Paddington Bear. All of the main characters in Paddington Bear are men who are going out to work, and the women are either activists with banners or posters or they're at home. It's those classic stories were written and created in a time where that was the gender norms. And we've been feeding ourselves this for generations.
And I think it's
Disney. I mean, you look at some of the Disney cartoons.
Yeah. There's not. I think Frozen was the first film where a girl was rescued by another girl, i.e., her sister. And I think now there's Brave and Moana, isn't there? And there's a good few ones. And my two older nephews were saying to my niece the other day, I think it was at Christmas or whenever it was, she wanted to watch Brave, and they were like, "Oh no, it's rubbish." And I went. They always know I'm always on the rant about something like that. I was like, "There were not films like this for girls when we were young. She's watching it, blah blah blah." And but it feels good that they're quite naive to that, but at the same time, we do kind of educate them that women haven't always had this privilege and these role models. It's so important that we have those role models, isn't it?
Yeah, I do get a bit frustrated sometimes with Hollywood that the female-led action movies are women just trying to be men, trying to live up to male stereotypes. And I think Charlize Theron did a couple of really good ones. Atomic, I can't remember the name of the film now, something Atomic, wasn't it? And,
Atomic Blonde.
And you think, you're actually watching it, it's just Atomic Blonde. And yes, it was a strong female character lead, but she was really not behaving as well as a woman in that role. Just behaving as a man. It was like it was an action hero as a woman rather than a woman being an action hero. And I think that's what the difference we've got to change is that we create new genres and new roles for women that are women being women, not women acting like men. That's part of the problem we're trying to fix.
Yeah, I think that's the real challenge. And again, I felt in the legal profession, climbing the ranks, as it were. It's no disrespect to any of the women that were kind of ahead of me, but again, I saw that. I didn't feel particularly supported by women in the field, unfortunately, but bar one who wasn't at the same firm. But there weren't those role models for me, and I was kind of looking at the women, who were partners and things like that, and thinking, not really sure that's a fit for me. So I really felt like I didn't really have anywhere to go with it. And I have a course actually, it's called the 24 Principles to Feminine Success. And it's something that I've taught for around 5 years. And it was actually really hard for me to articulate at the time. I just kind of had a download about it. I was like, oh my God, this is really important. And I still teach it now. It runs through She Rebel Radio, the podcast. And it's really about how we introduce more feminine-based principles into positions of leadership, whilst honouring the masculine ones as well, because we all have masculine and feminine energy, but we've been taught that more masculine-based principles and more powerful than the feminine ones. And I often say the suppression of women also has equal to the suppression of the feminine and feminine-based principles, which we really need to introduce back in to bring balance and harmony in. And when I started looking at those principles, I was like, this is the reason the world's such a mess, climate change, poverty, all of this stuff. But at the same time, it's very important to not, really blame the masculine principles as well, because then we perpetuate more of the same problem.
I think I was watching on telly last night or the other night about this role they now have a role on film sets and TV programs called the intimacy coach that helps define the boundaries and barriers between actors on set and what is they negotiate what is appropriate or inappropriate for their own personal space. And I was like amazed that we're down to that level of now having to help women create these boundaries, because they're often put in uncomfortable situations by male directors or male co-stars or whatever it may be. And it's really interesting to see that the intimacy coach is now an integral part of filmmaking.
Oh wow, that's incredible. But what does that? That's quite horrifying. What that shows in terms of in terms of, it's funny, someone put something on LinkedIn, it was a good couple of years ago now, but I think it might have been around the Me Too movement of, business networking when we were allowed to be in the same room, which we haven't been for quite some time. Is it acceptable to give someone a hug and a kiss, and all of that? And it's so important we're having those conversations. But then it's kind of, I don't know, it's kind of sad at the same time, because I'm like, if there are too many rules put in, that's just, as human beings, we're not that linear. It really is. But for me,
no.
Part of that is, I'm very empathetic, so I can read a situation like that and know what's appropriate and what isn't. And I appreciate that a lot of other people don't, and they find that more difficult. And again, I only leaving the legal profession really saw that as a massive strength that I have, because I would watch, other lawyers and people, and I could see a situation that was going to escalate in the courtroom, by the way the lawyer was talking to the client, etc. But I was never told at school, or when you look at skill sets and things of like, oh, you're massively empathetic, you're really good at tuning in with people, going straight in with what they need, because again, they're more feminine based. It's a more feminine based skill set, traditionally, and it's just not something that's valued. So why would you be told that?
Yeah, it's interesting. The hug and the kiss as a greeting, isn't it? That awkward social situation. Is it one kiss on the cheek? Is it two? Or we going French and doing three? Or that hug that lasts for half a second too long, and you come away feeling kind of like, oh, that was a bit unnecessary.
Yeah,
that creepy feeling you get sometimes.
Yeah, we've all been there. Haven't we? Yeah. Well, I had it, historically with some of my, criminal clients, bless them, and I had a really good relationship with many of my clients because they were regulars, but I remember a few of them in slow motion, getting a good result in court, and then a client, sometimes they weren't very well washed, and, drug addicts and things like that. That wasn't the physical contact, it was something I really didn't want or need, but yeah, it was in slow motion. I remember a few of that. So it's difficult, isn't it? But now we've got coronavirus kind of elbow bumps and things like that. But as humans, it's so important that we do need physical contact. Maybe not in a business setting, but then it was some business related. I've had the business relationships with some people like that, and not others. It's all about us learning to read situations and communicate. Really, communication's key.
Yeah, I do recognise that subtle physical contact is a way of creating a bond. It's a way of showing understanding, affection, wherever it may be. But some of it is steeped in patriarchy, isn't it? That touch of the elbow, that press in the back, in the small of your back, you first type gesture. Some of those are very patronizing in a way, and reinforcing male power, male privilege, and it's quite unless you step back and see it and experience it at some point and be aware of it, you just think it's polite societal thing, but it is reinforcing that power imbalance.
Yeah, it really is. And I remember, again, me always being a challenger by nature. I was only a trainee lawyer in London, and one of our trainers, he wasn't a partner at that point, but with one of the other trainees, tapped her on the head. And we all used to go to the pub together and things like that. And I was like, because we were friends as well. And I always had a bit of a big mouth, but I was like, don't, tap her on the head like she's, and I went off on one about it because, again, I didn't like what I saw, because it was kind of, it was quite a while ago, I guess I entered the legal profession, but not that long ago. There were all sorts of comments of, oh, whilst you're down there, all of that kind of stuff, which was so inappropriate. But I became so used to it. And then you build a certain barrier around yourself, I was probably at times more serious than I needed to be. And because I had to, or felt like I had to, get control of a situation so I wouldn't become, as a young female, the butt of all the jokes. I wanted to be taken seriously. So, it's, I felt like I had to bring a certain amount of energy into a room to ensure that happened. And ultimately, that exhausted me after 11 years. I was like, I'm just exhausted of doing it all the time.
That's the bringing your whole self to work sort of metaphor, isn't it? Where you have to put this mask on, you have to wear this suit of armor, and you can't be the relaxed, real you because you've got to think about what's going on around you all the time.
Yeah, you have. And in the last I wanted to leave for about 2 years. I felt there was a whole world of different things going on out there, and the legal system's quite archaic and old fashioned. And I felt I'd go to my office in the morning and pick up my files of court, and I felt this, here it goes. I could suddenly become aware of this kind of energy that I needed this mask, this armor I needed to put on to deal with the day ahead. And, not forgetting, I'm not just blaming, male lawyers, police officers, it's a very masculine environment. Not to forget, I was dealing with, rapists, murderers, all of that kind of stuff. So I went into my first prison at the age of 19, very patriarchal institution, the way they're designed, etc. But it really did have an impact. And as I said, I'm naturally empathetic and very sensitive by nature and all of that. And I'd even forgotten that about myself because I'd had to, keep all of that away from me.
So you said when we were chatting earlier on that you're a feminist, a feminist, and I'm assuming you're a fourth wave feminist. It's around equality for all. This is not around a protest. This is about creating equitable spaces so that gender norms are kind of erased, if you like, and everybody can be anybody. And it's not just about promoting women at the expense of men. It's creating a society that's fair and equal for all. Is that how you see it?
Yeah, absolutely. It definitely is how I see it. And we can't solve a problem with the same thinking that created it. So, I'm very, and that's why I'm very passionate as well about bringing in more feminine based principles in terms of, I see inclusivity and oneness as a very feminine based principle, and a more masculine principle is division and separation. But that has its purpose, right? We need to divide and separate ourselves to identify what thought is ours compared to someone else's, etc. But when we live in a world that values that more than the inclusivity and the oneness, then we get disaster that we've kind of been facing for a long time. So, that inclusivity does still include men. They still need to be included in the conversation. And that's why I always say, every she-rebel, that's my version of feminism, wants freedom, not just for herself, but for everybody else. And, it's really important because we're seeing a lot at the moment. We're talking a lot about diversity, but what I'm really not seeing is inclusivity of diversity of opinion, because that is just not allowed right now. It's you're either Brexit or you're not. You're either pro getting the corona jab or you're not. That's all division and separation. And when we get too much of that, we're never going to solve these problems. We really need to respect and be in, create safe spaces for conversations where people are entitled to have an opinion and to have a different value system to you, like be open to that. It's really important that we can do that.
How do we get men to step up? When we saw it around the tragic killing and murder of Sarah Everard and the heightened awareness of violence against women and girls, and then the hashtag "not all men" started, but then, yes, but it is all women. It was kind of the retort. I've been at events which talk about promoting women in leadership, creating gender equality in the workplace. And I was on a panel in San Francisco looking out into the room in this session around advancing women in organizations. And there was, out of 400 or 500 people in the room, there were about 8 men. So it was women attending these forums to promote gender equality, not the men. And I'm a great believer that you have to involve the incumbent, the person with privilege, or hold the keys, if you like, in those conversations. And whilst we as women talk about it, if we're not involving men, we can't make progress.
Yeah. It's so difficult. I think it's at the same time, exclusion is the key to diversity. I can't remember who made that quote as well, because people say to me, "Why do you just host retreats for women?" And I'm like, because it's a very different conversation that happens when women come together. And actually, there's not been many platforms for women to do that, and many women can learn very differently in a different setting. And what I've noticed is, and we definitely need to include more men in the conversation. And there was a post of mine actually on LinkedIn the other day, and there was lots of men commenting, and I was talking about feminine principles, and it was great to see. I really don't think, more corporate-based men would have understood that even 5 years ago. So there's really an opening with that. But I feel like one thing as well that I would really love to see when men are included in the conversation, because I see this time and time again, is often you can have that, say, there's a room full of 40 women. And this was an event I was at the Canadian Embassy with a coach that I work with, and she was talking about women and our access to capital in business. And around 40 women in the room, 2 men. The voice of one guy was around 25% of that room. I couldn't even go and speak to that person when we were networking afterwards, because I was quite furious, because I was like, this is a platform for women to vocalize how they feel about accessing capital and funding for their business. It's a room for them to vocalize how they don't feel that their voices are heard. It's a room for them to vocalize they've been told to deepen their voice, to be taken more seriously, and he did. I also, again, me being massively empathetic, felt super sorry for him.
Our addressing.
Yeah, exactly. Sorry for him that he didn't even realize, because he's so used to, and Mary Beard talks about this, of we see authoritative speech as male, that he came in and he had the right to that room. That's how he felt. Came in the suit, he had the right to that room, he had the right to the opinion, he had a voice that deserved to be heard. And, so we do need to invite men into the conversation, but we also need to make sure that women's voices are still heard within those rooms. That's the biggest key.
Mm. I mean, it's often like criticizing the lion for eating the antelope. It wasn't actually that man's fault. That was how he was bred, brought up. That's how he's had to fight in a man's world to always be told to get your point across, be assertive, speak up, express your views, and fight your corner. And men don't think in a way where they listen first, understand the room, and then talk later. They feel that they've got the right to have that opinion because that's how they advance in a man's world.
Yeah, that's their birthright.
So don't criticize the lion.
Yeah, no, exactly. That's their birthright.
That's what we need to change, how we nurture our young boys.
Yeah, absolutely. It's and Mary Beard, I don't know if you've read Women in Power. She talks about Odyssey and coming back from war, and the mother comes down and wants to say something, and the little boy sends her away. Go away, mother. This isn't a place for you here. We've grown up with this, Roman Greek literacy running through so many things, and again, that's another subtle message that has been there for such a long time, and that's even a woman in the home, let alone in a business place or actually on the war zone and all of that kind of stuff. So and I really do. I've got a self-study course which is called the 3 Keys to Self-Actualization, which is around self-securitize, self-authorize, and self-express. And I'm yet to take a woman through that process, no matter where she is on her journey, even if she really is empowered, that hasn't had major breakthroughs of because as women, that conditioning of security comes outside of you, authority comes outside of you, and it's not really okay to fully express who you are and what it is that you've got to say, because there's that subtle message is there somewhere.
I've lived a life of 2 perspectives. Socialized most of my life in my previous perspective for 40, nearly 50 years. And my wife and I are still trying to rewrite the boundaries or rewrite the rules in our relationship. And despite our best intent, we still have kind of gendered or stereotypical roles within our household. And if it requires muscle or carrying, it tends to be my job. If it involves driving, it tends to be my job. If it involves more empathy or birthday presents or birthday cards or things like that, that tends to be my wife's role or primary role. And we don't have a problem with it. It's just how we've grown up together. But we're trying to rewrite some of the rules so that I don't feel excluded from some of her traditional gendered roles in the home, if you like, and I don't want her to feel excluded from getting involved with some of the things I used to do, and it's trying to share that out. But I often find we often thank each other for doing things, and I think I don't want to be thanked for taking the bin out. It's my role as well. It's kind of we're sharing, and we're still getting used to that idea of it's not your role, it's not my role. It's just a job that needs doing. And whichever one of us does that, it's not about thanking. It's acknowledging that I just got on and did something that needed to be done. And it's a real challenge to try and rewrite that gendered rule book, certainly in a relationship.
Yeah, no, definitely. It is. It's, and I think, that's why I do love as well. I practice lots of yoga and definitely spiritual side to me and what I do and what I teach, in terms of that, masculine and feminine energy that, it can change, it can flow, we can flux, we can, it's fluid, right? It's not a structured system thing that society has tried to condition us to believe it is. And, that can make relationships even more beautiful in terms of, finding that, what that looks like for each individual, and then each, relationship coming together is really, really powerful. And I have like some feminine flow days, and then I have my more like structured, I've got to get shit done kind of days. Sorry, I swore, rebel at heart. And and really tune in with where I'm at and how I'm feeling. And, I think it's really important that we really start to do that.
It's interesting you used a colourful word there. Does society still get shocked by women using expletives and swearing? Is it kind of seen as a kind of...
I think they do
that's not very
sometimes.
Feminine.
It's not.
Whereas a man could kind of go, yeah.
That's all right. That's all. Well, and even, my dad being so open-minded, he would say to us and my two older sisters, "Oh, it's not very ladylike." Yet he swears like a trooper. So, we're kind of like, we learn it from you, Dad. So, but yeah, no, I do think I swear on my podcast, but it is called She Rebel Radio, so I don't know what your rules are.
I don't have any rules. This is not a PG show or anything like that. This is just is aimed at business, and people say what they want to say. No, I don't have any rules. If you want to say shit, you say shit. Let's avoid some of the big nasty words. It's okay for Graham Norton. It's okay on here. I think it's probably
okay. That's good to know. And the interesting thing about that word "shit" as well is it's quite a. I with coaching, I'm a multiple brain coach as well, which is head, heart, gut. That's quite a guttural word, which is a lot where we place a lot of our identity and all of that kind of stuff. Just as we were talking about that, this was that male or female, is it acceptable in certain groups? That it's an interesting point.
Yeah, I often use bullshit as a phrase or term when I'm talking about meritocracy, the bullshit of meritocracy, or I'm happy to call out bullshit of something as all these sort of kind of business societal tropes reach out and I go, hang on, that's complete BS. That's not. We made those rules. We can change those rules.
Yeah,
it's a societal social construct. Let's not get hung up on that.
Yeah, no, and exactly.
I was saying bullshit in my own mind this morning. I was reading this article on the BBC website, a news article around how everybody wants to return to the office, and that's what everybody wants to do. So then I started unpicking the article, and it was property managers, it was leasing companies, it was all property companies who had a vested interest in setting this narrative that people want to return to the office. People need to go to the office to socialize. No, people don't need to go to the office to socialize. They need to come home earlier in the evenings. They don't need to spend 3 or 4 hours commuting, so they have more home time, so they can socialize at home, they can socialize in the community. And we've decided that the business has evolved based on this paradigm, and this is how we've done it. Let's say, okay, one of the routes to socialization is working together. One of the ways we can learn and nurture and coach each other is to be in the same room. But let's say the objective is to learn, nurture, and coach and create socialization. How could we do that that's not in the same way? We can give enrichment in different ways. We can create more local community hubs. We can not spend that 4 or 5 hours burning fuel, sitting in traffic jams, trudging on the train, destroying our work-life balance, eating into our family time, actually create a new paradigm that says, let's not propagate that BS as the only way of achieving those goals. And that's what I want to see happen, where people don't go, well, we've got to go back. That's the only way we can solve this problem, because it's not.
No, it really isn't. And I think, any article that says everyone wants X is just, again, like we are a diverse, eclectic mix of people. Like what works for one person is not going to work for somebody else. But, I love that people have really had this taste of freedom that I, myself obtained when I left the legal profession coming up 6 years ago, I think. May even be more, maybe even be 7 at the end of this year, that I suddenly got this taste of freedom that I could go and sit down the beach and, have my tea in the morning and have time for yoga and walk and, really create space for myself. And during the first lockdown, I saw that beach kind of like fill up, which I was kind of horrified because I felt like it was my beach at 9 a.m, that all of a sudden everyone else had access to that. That I think what's not going to change is that, people really are seeing that actually freedom is a personal thing, and we really can create more of it if we don't follow these really archaic, ridiculous rules, which quite frankly were created in industrialization as well, where we were sitting, in factories churning out lots of things. And, the education system is very much designed to put us into the workplace and for us to follow the rules. And, if humanity as a whole is really going to evolve in the way that we should, we need to create a lot of more space for creativity. And, as I said, the hint there is space. We need space to learn to think differently, to have different conversations and nurture a new way of being. And we're not going to do that by sitting in offices for 10 hours a day and commuting for God knows how long as well.
I like that. I'm a great believer in the rise of the artisan, the empowered individual working as part of a team who can create. And they have time to think, to create, to fail fast, to explore opportunities and ideas. Okay, not every job role supports that level of thinking. But we've got to recognise that there are a lot of people out there who are creative. We've got to think about a lot of people are able to manage their own work schedule, their own work-life balance. And we have to allow those people to do that. And I think when we come from this command and control, presenteeism mentality, where if I can't see you, I can't trust you, we've got to try and break that and re-educate our leaders to see people in a different way. And I think that has happened over COVID, but I'm still worried that there are hidden agendas of people who want to drive going back to the way things were as quick as they can.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
for financial obligations, we want the rail infrastructure, we want the underground infrastructure, we want the planes, all of these public transport systems. They would become superfluous if people didn't start using them again. All these road expansions we're doing, and people aren't driving as much anymore. So there are some invested interests in getting people to start commuting again.
Yeah, there are, and again, they come from quite patriarchal, masculine roots. Whilst we need those things, because one thing we did see really flourish with lockdown, etc., is nature. Really started to heal herself. We saw people really connecting with nature for the first time, in a long time. At the same time, when we're having, more natural words deleted from dictionaries and replaced with like technological words and things like that. So, and people feeling more connected to their home and their families, and they are quite feminine based principles. And, that's really important that starts to come in, and we don't just go back to the old way of doing things. And if we don't, and I'm really passionate about, nature and all of that stuff, it's been a big part for me in moving, forward and doing things differently. And we really need to start looking after that. Otherwise it's not going to be a very nice place for any of us to live.
Yeah, I've certainly embraced my femininity in terms that I now see my strength as the people who are next to me and around me, whereas before maybe I saw my strength as people who are beneath me. So it's a very much, I prefer that collaborative peer, real deep friends and sharing, rather than that hierarchical. I need to achieve a status and this is how I demonstrate my status with stuff and big things and expensive things. It's now all about a more, a more earthly understanding your place in the world, understanding how you could influence through collaboration, through generosity.
Yeah, through that
it's a completely different metaphor that I'm experiencing.
Yeah, through that interconnection that we were talking about. And again, that's why, and I think women flourish so much at our retreats because we're always surrounded by nature. There's that, we have, we don't have any more than 8 women. So there's that real like connective piece where everybody is heard. And, when you compare that to more patriarchal systems and structures within business, how much do we value when someone's asked to speak at an event? Oh my God, they're the speaker. Like they're so prestigious, etc. And I often say, and this probably might not go down somewhat that well in some respects of like speaking is quite a masculine principle. Listening is a feminine one. And I will repeat, we all have masculine and feminine energy. But, if we valued listening as much as we value speaking, again, how would things change? And I think that's starting to shift. I know in coaching profession, we massively value active listening. And sometimes that entails not even fixing a problem for someone. There's a great compassion when you witness someone wherever they may be at. That's kind of healing and helps people move through it itself. But, we don't say, we don't congratulate someone for listening very often.
No, that's so true. How often do we hear a leader say, this is the problem, this is how we think we should solve it, what do you think? That sets the scene for kind of nodding groupthink. It doesn't really set the scene for thinking or challenging. It's when people get used to the idea of saying, well, this is the challenge we're trying to solve, who's got some great ideas, and then ask people what their ideas are, and then maybe as a leader, don't even speak. Don't give your opinion. You're there to collect that diversity of thought, that input, that creativity, and set people on that path to doing what they do. Otherwise, you might as well just have a company full of automatons or minions just doing your bidding all the time.
Yeah, it's really, asking those powerful questions and allowing people, as you say, to come up with that creativity. And, as a coach, I do that frequently. And, clients that work with me frequently or over a period of time find themselves going, oh, can I have your feedback? Because I do give feedback. I'm not a coach that doesn't give any kind of feedback and insight because that's, again, part of my power. But, I won't give it until they're ready and they've gone through the process that they need to go to by answering their own questions and, moving that forward because they always know the answer to the question. I don't, they do. And, so do people on teams and things like that. If you give them that space, again, the word space, is so important, because transformation happens in the space in between things. And if we fill it all the time with stuff, then, things really can't move forward and move through.
Mm. Yeah, I think you also create an environment where you always feel you have to ask permission to do something. You always have to ask, am I right all the time? Rather than just trusting your own judgment, trusting your own capability. And I think often we create these environments where that's the case. And I've worked in an environment where people constantly coming to me saying, is this right? Or how do I find that? Or can you tell me the answer to this? And I'm thinking, can you not do what I will do, which is Google that or think about it for 10 minutes? And if you're not careful, you almost like train people not to think for themselves. And I came across this technique that is colloquially known as rubber ducking. So instead of, you're not allowed to ask someone for help until you've stood in front of a rubber duck and talked about the problem to this inanimate object. And then as a result of this talking to the rubber duck, most people can solve their own problem because they've spoken it out loud. They're hearing their own thoughts. They're having to formulate their thinking to this plastic duck on the shelf. And it's cut down in this organization that they're advocating for it. It cut down the number of questions to managers or to leaders. It increased empowerment, and it created a real change of culture where people felt they could bring their own ideas. And then they were saying that everyone has their own rubber duck. They buy their own duck. They put it on their own shelf. And often at times of the day, you look around this office and there's all these people just talking to ducks around the office. And it's part of their culture. And it creates that creativity. It allows people to think. And so often, if you're stuck and you don't know where to go, just buy yourself a rubber duck, stick it on the shelf and talk to it.
No, I think one of my clients was sharing that at one of our retreats, actually, because everyone was saying that they were going to get themselves a duck. And I find, because a lot of my clients can come from quite corporate positions, and they're setting up their own business, consultant coaching, or doing something more creative. And, again, there is a real struggle with making decisions, moving things forward, which, as you have to do when you're running your own business. I feel quite privileged that I've never really struggled with that, because being a court advocate, I was also a police station representative. So I didn't have time to call someone and say, oh, what should we do about, what advice should I give this client? I had to do it on my feet all the time, which is a gift and a curse, because sometimes I can make decisions that are too quick and I haven't really thought it through, and I get frustrated if I haven't made a decision really quickly. I'm like, oh no, I can't sit with this. I've got to but it's definitely served me really well to have that autonomy, which is probably why in a more office environment and things I struggled when I couldn't do things my way, that I was like, oh, what do you mean we have to spend hours talking about it? I used to get really bored, and that's definitely a personality type for me. But it's really important that we all, so many of us, I had a story that I wasn't creative because my mum's an artist, actually, and my older sister used to try and get me to draw things when I was 4 and told me it wasn't very good because she was kind of 12 and very talented. And I had this story because I couldn't draw, I wasn't creative, but we're all creative. You're creating this podcast, I create my podcast, I create courses, I create retreats, I create so many things. I love to cook, all of those things. So, really, really finding whatever lights, you up creatively. Anyone who's listening is really important to nurture that, because creativity creates more creativity and more of it. And that's what we need more of.
And that probably comes back to something you said at the beginning around creating space for women to have time for themselves. Because unless you have that time for yourself, that ability to clear your mind, it's very hard to be creative when you're at the coalface, digging and digging and digging, or cooking and cooking, or educating and educating, whatever you may be doing on a daily basis. That's time for you to just blue sky think, to relax, to open up. That's the challenge, isn't it?
It really is. And I don't know if you're aware of the statistic. It's in the book Invisible Women, which says that 75% of the world's unpaid work is completed by women, which is huge. again, as a criminal defence lawyer, that was a punishment handed out in court, unpaid work, it's a community sentence, mostly for men, because there tends to be more men in the criminal justice system, which is an entire separate conversation. But when I read that statistic, the amount of mundane tasks that women are tied up in, which is really preventing them from developing their genius. And I'm super grateful, I don't have children, etc. But my mum actually, she would really run my parents' business. She held the purse strings. She made a lot of decisions and was a real role model for me for that. And one of her biggest, amongst many other things, was every working woman deserves a cleaner. She always had a cleaner. She was like, not only do I support another woman's business, because women tend to be cleaners, that's just the statistic, but B, that really created the space for her. And again, that's a conversation I have with a lot of clients. Like, you can scrub your toilet, or you can actually work on your business. Like, which choice is it going to be? And I know the pandemic hasn't helped. We haven't had, allowed to have cleaners in the house and whatever. But, it really is important for women, wherever they're at, to have that conversation with themselves and go, actually, which of these mundane tasks needs to be done by somebody else so I can focus on my genius, my evolution, my genius, what I'm here to do, because that really is, why we're here, to create change. And you're not going to do that by being too involved in the mundane. That might be your revolution. If it's just that, please do it.
And that's why going out for a meal, but that's why going out for a meal can be so special. You don't have to think about preparing it, shopping for it, buying it, planning it. You just turn up, eat it, and then say bye, and you deal with the washing up. And that's why it's such a great thing to do, is just taking time out of your life to have a meal out, because that's time that you would have otherwise had to spend doing that yourself. And I think that's why I would always say, even if it's just fish and chips on the seafront, it's a way of breaking that cycle of here I go again.
Yeah. As you say, that important of breaking that cycle of the mundane. We have to do, things that we have to do, but breaking that. And as you say, if you're sitting somewhere beautiful, having fish and chips on the beach, you've saved yourself the time of thinking about all of that stuff, but you've also, hopefully creating that space that we're talking about. I know when I feel stuck, I get up, I go for a walk, I go to the beach, I practice yoga. That's when my best ideas come. It doesn't come when I sit in front of my laptop going, right, Lulu is working. It's when I'm wandering around doing other things.
Yeah, I completely agree. Oh, I can't believe it. We've been going for an hour, just over an hour. Wow. It's been such an inspirational and enlightening conversation. I'm sure we could have carried on for another couple of hours without a break. And no, I really, in fact, I think you kind of invited me to be on your podcast. I'm looking forward to maybe having a rematch and carrying on the conversation, maybe from my perspective. That'd be really interesting. So how can our listeners get in touch with you?
So my website is lulumins.com. So that's super easy to find. She Rebel Radio, the podcast, is on all the usual platforms, Apple, Podbean, Spotify. So that's super easy to find. And I tend to be Lulu Mins on LinkedIn, Instagram, and Facebook. So yeah, either Lulu Mins or She Rebel Radio, pretty easy to find.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for your time and your contribution. Absolutely amazing. And also a huge thank you to you, the listener, for tuning in, listening to the end. Thank you so much. And please do subscribe to keep updated on future episodes of the Inclusion Bites podcast. That's BITES. Tell your friends, tell your colleagues. I'm sure they'd love to join in and listen too. And of course, I've got a number of other exciting guests lined up over the next few weeks and months. So please do, if you subscribe, you'll get notified. And of course, if you'd like to be a guest, I'd love to have you on. So please email me to joe.lockwood@cchainchapman.co.uk. And of course, tell me if you've got any ideas or suggestions on how I can improve the show. So finally, my name is Joanne Lockwood. It's been an absolute pleasure to host this podcast for you today. Catch you next time. Bye.